We were definitely trying to put Jase in front of the camera way more and have him be a mouthpiece of everything that we're doing. And like you said, the best things come out of the worst things. Him having to go back to Australia kind of forced him to see where he was going to be able to take this and be the person that he ultimately has become. And we are so proud of you.
Oh, I appreciate it. And yeah, man, I had nothing, man. When I went back, I literally had the, thank you, yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I had like 2 cameras at the time. And then
at least they didn't steal those at LAX, because you did have them with you, right? They went through your stuff.
Well, yeah, that was the thing. So they basically said, if we let you in, then we're going to seize this camera equipment, and then you need to go to federal court to prove legit.
What?
So then, yeah.
You're just trying to come over and freaking shoot some podcasts.
And what did you have, the Sonys or Reds with you?
No, I lost the Red. The red went in the, yeah. So I literally had one Sony. So I did work for you, and you paid for that Sony. There was like a shoot. There was a shoot that I did for you, and you were like, all right, well, it'll be about this. I'll pay for this.
Dinner's on you tonight then.
100%.
All right.
I mean, I could use some lunch too.
But yeah, it was pretty crazy how it sort of worked out. And then it was cool because it was one of those things where I had no plan B. I had nothing going on. I was looking at the barrel of basically like, you get a job for the first time in your life, essentially, since you're like 18 years old, or make the podcast thing work. So I swallowed my pride. I lived at my parents at 29 years old, and I just did the podcast.
And one thing you're not even thinking about here is what happened to me. I lost one of my best shooters and my best friend. Gone. Just gone.
But look at you now. You got this big house. Maybe it was good. Maybe it was
it's funny though. Like there's like looking back, there's no way the podcast would probably be where it is, right?
Absolutely.
Like it forced you to make the podcast work. Where like I would hate to say, kind of like us, it's like we shoot it when we can. We're not like it's a very small part of our business, right?
Yeah.
Like so it's. We try to get to it when we can, but we don't live and breathe this podcast like you do, right? Like that's your livelihood, right? So it essentially forced you to make this podcast or broadcast.
100%. And I literally had nothing else. And it was at a time, at this time now, it was like early 2018. And the podcast thing wasn't a thing. I mean,
especially on YouTube, it was. I mean, no one was using, even Steve. No one was using YouTube as a platform, right?
Yeah,
maybe Joe Rogan.
And yeah, well, that was the only podcast that I'd ever listened to. And me and Jeremy, when we'd go to shoots or we'd go to races, we would like listen to an episode on the plane, and then we'd talk about it. And then he was telling me for years. He's like, you need to start a podcast. You need to start a podcast. You have the craziest stories, the craziest people. Like, you have to do this. And I've for whatever reason, just never took it serious. But yeah, when I went home, I had nothing, like literally nothing to do. That's when I started jiu-jitsu, and literally I would do 2 classes of jiu-jitsu a day. And then I would just sit for 8 hours and work on the podcast. Like, that was my only thing.
And I think we're both at intersections in our life. And I'm having a hard time thinking back now of following your footsteps when you first got back and got off the ground. But like when you first started it, when was it depressing, hype? Like what was your emotions? Like, were the views good? Like at what point in time did you realize it was actually going to become something?
Like, when I think an idea is good, I kind of don't care what anyone else thinks.
100%.
Like,
just like this podcast, 17 people listen to it, and here we are. We're still doing it.
Yeah, because there's like a vision that it's, and for you guys, this podcast isn't necessarily about views. It's like a part of like a bigger play,
Yeah.
So it's like, but for me, I was like, no one's doing this, and I like really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I really liked doing it, and I've had awesome conversations with people my whole life. When I grew up, I was the kid that would talk to adults. Like, when we were at dinner, when I was a kid, I would be the one that all the other kids would be at the kids' table. I would be at the adults' table talking to the adults. Like, it's just...
I remember plenty of shoots that you were at the adults' table, and I'm like, does this guy ever shut up?
That's me. So then
He would also be the guy traversing topics that I'm like, we should not be traversing these topics at this particular dinner table.
Him and Jay in a room, they may never leave, bro.
Oh, yeah. So I just like, I thought it could work. No one else was doing it. It was... And I didn't think of it ever being like a moto thing. I was like, I could be like the Aussie Joe Rogan type of dude, because in Australia, I remember going home, like when I'd go back from trips to be in Oz, I'd be like, oh, you guys listen to Rogan? Literally no one in Australia was listening to podcasts. And I had a rule dude, Chipotle, right? So like I'd come over here, Chipotle was massive. I'd go home, zero Mexican food. And then I learned in my time here that Australia is always about 6 years behind the US, right?
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
So 2012 was when I was like really got like deep into Rogan. And I was like, okay, so I got into Rogan in 2012. So if I'm going to apply the 6 to 8 year rule, 2018 is like the year that podcasts are going to like blow up in Australia. So yeah, it was just like a kind of combination of things. I enjoyed it. And I was like, all right, I'm going to, and at the start I had like NRL, like our NFL, we call it, it's like NRL, it's a different sport, but so we had like NRL players, I had V8 supercar drivers, I had like all these different people.
That's what I've always respected or loved about Gypsy is the fact that you should have just gone moto, and the fact that you thought more centrically and you had access to all those people. Like, I mean, we hung out for a damn near decade, and I didn't know that you somehow just have connections to everybody, and the fact that you've done what you've done and you stepped outside of moto from day one is pretty damn rad.